So that is mapping our module level objectives onto our course level objectives. Now, going back to our concept map, now that we have mapped our course level objectives and our module level objectives, we're going to talk about this aspect of varying the cognitive level of our objectives. And this is more focused on your module level objectives than it is course objectives, because there's so much more, there's so many more of your module objectives than there is course objectives. So we want to kind of focus our attention in terms of making sure that we vary our cognitive levels more so on the module objectives than the course objectives. So what do we mean by varying the cognitive levels? Well, you have your different levels of blooms, right? You've got moving from left to right here: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And that makes up the cognitive domain of Bloom's taxonomy. We also have in the updated Bloom's taxonomy a knowledge domain, which takes 4 types of knowledge and adds them into the cognitive domain. So what this gives us is a very effective way of being able to take our objectives and classify them and think about, what do I want to get out of this objective, right? What cognitive level do I want my students operating at, and what type of knowledge are they going to be getting out of this objective? And so we can take very similar objectives and put them at very different places on this chart. And it all goes back to what kind of evidence you're going to be anticipating to show mastery of this objective. So if we look at this blue objective here, list the components of a cell. So I would classify this as the remember cognitive level and as factual knowledge. And this is kind of your most basic area of the chart, right? Everything kind of in this general area is going to be more basic. Everything over in this general area is going to be a bit more complex. So if we're just simply talking about listing something, then that's going to be your more basic cognitive processing skills. Identify, looking at the green objective, if we're asking students to identify the components of a cell, well, now my evidence might be something along the lines of, looking at a diagram and having, arrows pointed at different things and being able to recognize what that arrow is pointed to. Okay, well, that's a much different cognitive process than simply listing all those components from memory. So over here, we're maybe just giving them a blank sheet of paper and saying, tell me all the parts of a cell. Whereas over here, we're giving them a diagram with different things labeled and asking them to identify what those labeled components are. Okay, so I can now take this same objective, identify the components of a cell, and based on the evidence and the assessment, I might move it down here. So moving it, staying in the same cognitive domain, but moving from a factual to a procedural knowledge domain, this might be something where now we're in a lab and we're actually with a microscope looking through and identifying those components ourselves and labeling them ourselves. Maybe we are doing some sort of dissection where we're taking muscle tissues and identifying the components of that. So you can see where this classification is going to be somewhat subjective, and it's going to be largely based on what you are wanting to get out of the objective. What kind of evidence do you want to get out of this objective? in terms of varying the cognitive levels, we want to make sure that by the time we have all of our objectives classified on here, that they don't all bunch up into one area. So if each one of these colors represents one module, right? So there's 3 objectives for module 1 in red, and then there are 3 more objectives here for module 2 represented by the green X's, and then my module 3 objectives are represented by the blue X's, and my module 4 objectives are represented by the purple X's. Okay, well, all of my objectives are bunched into this one location, right? So everything is on the lower end of the cognitive domain here with your lower order thinking skills, and in the factual and conceptual knowledge domains. Okay, now, depending on the course, this may or may not be okay, but it is something that you want to look out for. What we would rather see is all of our objectives kind of spread across the entire cognitive domain and knowledge domain. So just when you get done classifying, step back, take a look, and see, do I have a pretty good spread around the entire chart, or are all of my objectives kind of clustered into one centralized location? And if they are kind of clustered, then just go back and make sure that you're okay with that, and that you don't need to maybe rethink some of your objectives and try to get to some of those higher order thinking skills. So going back to our concept map, the module objectives are going to dictate your evidence, and then the assessment is going to emerge from that. And this classification process really kind of helps us to internalize all of this information, right? So when I'm going to classify this on this chart, then I'm already starting to think, okay, well, where does it go? Because this is the evidence I want. This is where I'm going to place it on the chart. And so you're already, with this classification process, starting to think about what the evidence is that you want, and that's going to make it easier to determine what the best type of assessment is going to be to get that evidence out of them.